It's the worst Syrian chemical attack in years. More than 70 people gassed to death in Idlib province. How will the world respond? Also on the program, the calls for Jacob Zuma to grow louder than ever before. After sacking the finance minister, South Africa's president hemorrhages support. Will this be the scandal that finally unseats him? I'm Imran Garda, and this is the Newsmakers. It's being called one of the worst chemical attacks in Syria's 6 years of war. The release of a suspected toxic nerve agent on a town in Idlib province choked the life out of more than 70 people. Those who saw it firsthand blamed the Syrian regime, but the regime says that's not true. And their main ally, Russia, blames the opposition. It says a Syrian airstrike hit the rebels' own chemical stockpile. The opposition strongly denies that, and some weapons experts argue that scenario isn't even scientifically possible. As the various versions of what happened compete for attention, world leaders are trying to outdo each other in condemnation and outrage. The UN Security Council is meeting to try and hold someone responsible. On the ground, rebels are calling on their fighters to retaliate, while Syrian jets continue to bomb Idlib. Peace and safety in Syria has never looked so far away. Today's newsmaker is the chemical attack on Idlib, and we begin with this report from Randolph Nogel.
Massacres are never clean. But the lifeless bodies here, father, mother, and child alike, with no visible wounds, evidence that this was an attack of a different kind.
There was a lot of smoke and there was a smell. It was very difficult to breathe. We couldn't breathe anymore.
Women were dying in their homes, in the streets in front of their homes. Some people had traces of blood coming out of their mouth.
Activists and local health workers say a noxious substance was dropped by the Syrian regime on an area of Khan Sheikhoun in Idlib province. The regime denies carrying out the attack, but its ally Russia says otherwise.
The Syrian aviation launched a strike on a large terrorist ammunition depot and a concentration of military hardware on the eastern outskirts of the town of Khan Sheikhoun. On the territory of this depot were workshops which produced chemical warfare munitions.
The visual evidence of the attack is difficult to reconcile with that account. The loss of innocent people is indisputable in what is being described as the worst of war crimes, and yet something that has happened before.
If we fail to act, the Assad regime will see no reason to stop using chemical weapons. As the ban against these weapons erodes, other tyrants will have no reason to think twice about acquiring poison gas and using them.
A prescient warning and an empty threat. The red line that former US President Barack Obama drew over the chemical attack in a Damascus suburb in 2013 would soon fade. Instead, the Assad regime was bolstered by Russia's military intervention and continued using indiscriminate warfare against rebels and civilians alike. By some estimates, dropping 13,000 barrel bombs in 2016 alone.
Any use of chemical weapons anywhere constitutes a threat to international peace and security and is a serious violation of international law.
But it's chemical weapons attacks that have spurred the international community to greater action, with few results.
The 115th meeting of the Security Council is called to order.
The UN Security Council has met to discuss this latest incident.
Will we take action?
And while there are calls for those responsible to be held to account, what's to be expected in a conflict where war crimes go unpunished? Randolph Nogel, the Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now by Dr. Mohammed Katoub in Gaziantep in southern Turkey. He's the Advocacy Director at the Syrian American Medical Society. And in the UK, Marijn Nieuwenhuis. He's a political geographer who specializes in the effects of chemical weapons at the University of Warwick. And from London, Alexander Nekrasov. He's a former advisor of the Kremlin. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Mohammed Katoub, let me start with you. Was it clear to you that this was sarin gas?
Well, actually, we as medical worker can describe the symptoms, which is indicative to usage of phosphorus compounds. So we cannot identify sarin itself, but it's the group of sarin. This is what the symptoms that our doctors witnessed on their patients.
Alexander Nekrasov, the Russians are saying that this was a rebel Al-Qaeda stock. It was bombed, yes, by the Syrians, but that it was the rebel stock that released these gases. Is that the way you see it?
Well, that's what the Russian Defense Ministry said. But I would like to ask one thing only. And who benefits from this use of chemical weapons? And unfortunately, the answer is the rebels. Because why would the Assad regime use chemical weapons at this delicate situation when the talks are on about the political solution, when the Syrian army is basically achieving its aims? What would be the point of using chemical weapons?
Okay, but Mr. Nekrasov, I've heard this argument before when 9/11 happened. People say, who benefits? It's the people who want to invade Iraq. So maybe George Bush did it to himself. I mean, we can use this argument over and over. Let's try to stick to this attack for the moment and try to understand who might have done it, right? Do you think it's possible, Mr. Nekrasov, that the Syrians bombed their people with chemical weapons as they did in the past in Ghouta, in Khan al-Assal and elsewhere?
Well, I don't see any point in doing that for the Syrian regime simply because it doesn't make sense. What I do see is that the finger of blame was pointed at the Syrian regime at once. Nobody tested anything. You know, it was immediate. Okay. On the 4th, we see that film appearing, and immediately Western politicians and others are saying, that's it. We've got evidence that it was the Syrian regime. Okay. I don't understand how that works.
Okay, it's not just Western politicians. Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu said the attack was a crime against humanity that could derail the fragile Syrian peace process. François Hollande has called for an international response. The US and so on have also done that. They're discussing it at the Security Council. Maren Nieuwenhuis, let's talk to the man who understands these weapons the best out of all of us in this discussion. Is it possible that the Syrians could have hit an Al-Qaeda depot and somehow those gases could have floated out and killed all those people? Is that theory plausible, Mare?
Well, that is very difficult for me to say. I mean, first there has to be forensic analysis done on site with biological samples. This is a very difficult question, very politically tense, so I can't give you a conclusive answer. My research mainly focuses on the exceptionality of chemical weapons, why it is that chemical weapons receive the attention they receive at the moment.
Okay, so let me then ask you what Alexander Nekrasov posed. Why would the Syrians use chemical weapons against those people in Idlib? Tell me why chemical weapons are used as they have been used throughout history. They've been used by Saddam Hussein in Iraq and so on. The Syrians have used them. They've used sarin gas. They've used chlorine. Why would you use chemical weapons?
That is, I think, the key question here. And in order to understand that, we have to first understand what a chemical weapon is. What gassing actually does. It is rather different than conventional weaponry in the sense that it uses the environment, in this case the atmosphere, the air, against the breather himself or herself. So the air becomes a weapon rather than you relying on a pistol or a gun. You use the air as an extended battlefield against the breather. Now, in terms of lethality, if you look at it quantitatively at the numbers, we will immediately see throughout the 20th century that the number of casualties from gas warfare has been minimal compared at least and especially to the attention gas weapons and gas attacks have received throughout the 20th century, up from the moment of the First World War up until yesterday, really. So there is a discrepancy between the lethality and the representation of gas weapons. And it is exactly that lethality can only be explained by understanding what chemical weapons do. They take away your breath. Literally, quite literally, take away your breath. The German thinker Peter Sloterdijk uses the term atmoterrorism or atmospheric terrorism because nothing is as scary and as frightening, as terrifying as the taking away of one's breath. And so it has largely psychological effects. It has.
Yes, and of course the pictures are absolutely horrendous. Mohammed Katoub, is it absolutely certain to you that Bashar al-Assad did this, that the Syrian army did this?
Well, we have been calling for investigation on the attacks on using unconventional weapons in Syria since a long time as medical workers and humanitarian workers in Syria. This is not the first time. This is not the 100th time. This is since August 2013 when the Ghouta massacre happened. This over 140 chemical attacks happened in Syria, and the joint investigation mechanism confirmed that 4 of those attacks were done by the Syrian regime. So we are calling to stop those attacks. If it's the Syrian regime or other parties are doing this, we noticed an increase in the usage of chemical weapons last 10 days. We received a barrel by a helicopter, barrel loaded with chemical gas in one of our hospitals, and a doctor died on March 25th, just 10 days ago. Who's flying over Syria? Who's using helicopters over Syria? This is the question which have to be answered here. Why investigators are not allowed to go to the locations where those chemical weapons have been thrown on? Till now, there is no reaction from the international community to stop those attacks, whether it's Bashar al-Assad or other people. Witnesses on the ground reported that a military jet implemented the attack on Khan Sheikhoun yesterday, and who own the military jets? Who's flying over Syria? This is a well-known answer.
Right, the rebels don't have aircraft. Alexander Nekrasov, I know you're skeptical, but let me just give you this quote from Rex Tillerson, the US Secretary of State. It is clear that this is how Bashar al-Assad operates, with brutal, unabashed barbarism. And then the US saying at the UN Security Council special meeting that the Russian claims do not comport with reality. Let me put it to you this way, Mr. Nekrasov. If it can be categorically proved that the Syrian regime did this and they used chemical weapons on their people, this is putting Moscow in a tricky position, right? Because at some point, they're going to have to distance themselves from Assad, aren't they?
Well, you're asking a hypothetical question, because if it is proved, now nothing has been proved, no evidence has been shown. Rex Tillerson may have made a statement. I actually saw the statement and read it. It's not as tough as somebody might want to perceive.
I just read you a direct quote from the statement, sir.
No, I know. I'm just telling you. Rex Tillerson is flying to Moscow on the 11th to talk about Syria. So we'll see what happens out of that. But I don't understand a situation when accusations are made immediately after an attack. Your expert has told us just now that he needs samples, he needs to look at the specifics. How come all these politicians suddenly, without any evidence, are showing the finger of blame? And
so
by the way,
how about the track record?
Last month in the United Nations, Russia and China have offered a resolution that all sides will report every use of chemical weapons when it comes to rebels, non-governmental groups, and so on.
Okay.
And guess what?
Allow me to come in there for a second. So let's look at Syria's track record here, right? Every time there was a chemical attack in the past, whether that was Ghouta or Khan al-Assad or any other of numerous chemical attacks in the past, they've always said, Mr. Nekrasov, that they didn't do it. They've often said that the rebels did it to themselves. Then why did we have to go through this whole process of the Russians getting involved, of the OPCW, of the Syrians handing over their chemical weapons? Why did we have to go through this whole rigmarole if they never had chemical weapons? So they're saying the same thing that they said in the past, but there was an implicit and direct even admission when they got involved with handing over their weapons. Isn't the same going to happen now? This is their track record. They never claim responsibility, Mr. Nekrasov.
Well, the rebels never accept that they have been using chemical weapons, and the Russian military have been showing proof that they have chemical weapons, that they did use them. So this is, you know, this leads us nowhere. My question still stands. Why would the Syrian government use chemical weapons now when it is winning the war? That makes no point. It makes no sense.
Maybe because there's no pressure on them. Have you considered that?
But why would they cause problems for themselves when they are winning, when the political process
Why would you kill 400,000 people in a war? I don't know the answers to these, but you're sort of, you tell me I'm posing hypotheticals. Aren't you posing hypotheticals here, sir?
400,000 people, you are saying, were killed from both sides. You can't just say Assad.
Actually, the best available estimates show that Assad has done the vast majority of the killing of those 400,000.
Unfortunately, we saw what the so-called moderate rebels are doing and how they're killing people. And unfortunately, I need to tell you something else.
Sure.
When I saw the footage of these so-called moderate rebels killing children and women, beheading some of them, are you going to tell me that I would need to believe these people who are committing such horrific crimes that suddenly they're all victims?
No, but can't we separate them out? We can say there's Daesh, we can say there's Nusra or Jabhat Fatah al-Sham, there's FSA. We separate these out. People go and look at them and we judge them by their actions. You're saying all of them are so-called moderates, so you're calling all of them terrorists.
You know when I have doubts? When this terrible thing happened, right? Everybody suddenly said it's Assad. No proof, nobody went to check anything. I'm sorry, that doesn't work like this in the real world. You can't put the blame on somebody without any proof at all.
Mohammed Katoub, okay, Alexander Nekrasov. Mohammed Katoub, is this going to change the direction of the war or change at least the way people perceive the war, or is anybody going to do anything about it at the UN or do anything different?
Previously, three UN Security Council resolutions were adopted condemning the usage of chemical weapons inside Syria. The third one was to create the joint investigation mechanism. A report was released last October confirming the usage of chemical weapons by the Syrian regime. Nothing happened. This is the results of the absence of accountability in the country. Now the escalation of usage of chemical weapons was accompanied by attacks on the health facilities responding to the treatment for those patients, which is a strategy was used by the Syrian regime since the beginning of the war. Attacks the facilities, treating the people, saving lives inside the country. The impact of this escalation is horror inside the country, horror between the people. One of our doctors called and we were just trying to calm them. He said, just, I want a mask. I want to continue what I'm doing. The doctor who died on March 25th, he died in the operation room. Now tell me that this was not a hospital. Tell me that this was not a helicopter dropped the param. This was our hospital. This was our doctor who was killed by a barrel bomb loaded with chemical weapon. So what's the impacts now is more horror in the country. No one is stopping those attacks. Escalation in violence in the country. Accountability and justice is the only thing that might stop all of this. And I don't see one of the Syrian government or its allies calling for justice and accountability.
Okay, Mohammed Katoub, Marijn Nieuwenhuis, and Alexander Nekrasov. Gentlemen, I appreciate you all taking the time to talk to us. Thanks so much. To many, it must have seemed like an April Fool's joke, sacking a competent finance minister just 6 weeks after he delivered a new budget. Yet, to the dismay of many South African government ministers, President Jacob Zuma acted against all advice and replaced the man in charge of the country's purse strings. And it was no laughing matter. It was part of a cabinet reshuffle dubbed a ministerial massacre, and it sparked a scandal that could just bring Jacob Zuma's reign to an end. Now, 2/3 of the alliance that keeps Zuma in power says it's time for him to go. So, was this one bold presidential move too far? Or will Zuma manage to see out his term at the end of the year? Natalie Perhernan reports.
The chorus of protests for Jacob Zuma to resign have been ringing out loudly. They have been made before, but this time the political mood has changed, with South Africans still in shock over the president's drastic and unilateral cabinet reshuffle.
I've decided to make changes to the national executive in order to improve efficiency and effectiveness.
That included sacking respected Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan.
So the one thing we must emphasize is our souls are not for sale.
The economic fallout has been swift. Ratings agency Standard & Poor's responded by downgrading South Africa's credit rating to junk status for the first time in 17 years, sending the rand, bonds and banking shares tumbling. But the political cost could be the biggest price paid by Jacob Zuma and the African National Congress. Zuma has officially lost the support of two of the ANC's key allies, the Trade Union Federation COSATU and the South African Communist Party. They have both called for his resignation, and it's threatening to split the ANC. Jacob Zuma's nickname is the Teflon President. He's facing 783 corruption charges. Last year, the Public Protector released a 355-page report detailing allegations that his presidency had been captured by a wealthy Indian family, the Guptas, with whom his family has close ties. Zuma has been ordered to pay back taxpayer money spent on upgrading his home. And he's survived no confidence votes in Parliament and from his own party. But was this latest move a step too far for even Zuma's supporters? In December, the ANC is due to elect its new head in the lead-up to the 2019 elections. Zuma has been promoting his ex-wife, former African Union chairwoman Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, as a successor. But will the president's actions mean the party will be forced to move in a new direction for its own political survival? Natalie Perhernan, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by Zwanele Jimmy Manyi in Johannesburg. He's a member of the ANC and the president of the Progressive Professionals Forum. Also from Johannesburg, Jamie Mighty. He's a political activist. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. Zwanele Manyi, is the president being reckless with the economy and with South African democracy with these latest moves?
No, not at all. The president has not been reckless at all. I think the new finance minister is a solid guy. A master's graduate, somebody with no less than 7 years experience as a minister, and he has been serving in cabinet. So it's not like it's a cold appointment as it were. So indeed, this was a very good appointment, and for most of us in the country, we are fully behind this appointment. The ANC itself has pronounced today to say that they support Malusi Gigaba, and they think it's going to do a great job. So I have nothing to believe that it will be otherwise. In fact, even if you look at the...
Sure. Mr. Manyi, if it's a solid appointment, why is COSATU, the trade union bloc, the Communist Party, these are your allies, why have they turned against the president? And why is the economy in trouble? Why is the rand plummeting? And why did S&P downgrade South Africa's rating to junk status? Tell me why. Yeah, no, look, I think the Standard & Poor's has been very clear about why they have downgraded South Africa. And they've said the reason is the issue of political uncertainties. And if you ask me, I think people like Communist Party are the ones that must be blamed for giving mixed messages, as it were, being an ally of the ANC. Okay, so it's the Communist Party and others who are to blame. Jamie Mighty, it's not the president's fault. Everything's okay. This is a solid appointment, according to Jimmy Manyi. What do you think, Jamie?
I think absolutely Jimmy Manyi is not correct. If you look at Malusi Gigaba's track record, He has no education in finance. He has no training in finance. He has not served in a finance position ever before. I mean, his last appointment as the Minister of Home Affairs does not give him any track record or expertise to move into a very important portfolio such as the Treasury. And further, if you look at the appointments that were made by the president, he didn't actually remove the ministers who have faced a lot of criticism. The Minister of Basic Education, the ministers who have been lambasted in the media for mishandling the allocation of social grants and defying a constitutional court decision. Further, when you look at the analysis given by Standard & Poor, it was also that they are concerned about policy changes in the fiscal approach. And already Malusi Kigaba has indicated that there will be some more radical economic policies which haven't been formulated, which haven't been clarified thus far.
Right, Jamie,
so
let me jump in just for a second,
Jamie. Be nervous.
Jamie, yet he's still standing. Do you want him to step down? Do you want President Zuma to step down, Jamie?
I think a lot of South Africa does want President Zuma to step down because President Zuma is a tainted president. It's not just the latest decision he's made with Malusi Kigaba. It's several decisions he's made with ministers in the Treasury, but other decisions he's made around governance without even looking at the accusations which exist around him being a corrupt leader. We think you can make a strong case on poor decision making as an executive in government. So I think a lot of South Africa is concerned about the kind of decisions that Jacob Zuma is taking, and there is a legitimate case to be made for him to step down.
Right.
We do think that it's best for the country for Zuma to step down.
Okay, Zwanele, Jimmy Manyi, he's a tainted president. Are you going to be the last man standing to defend the president?
No, I think this gentleman here is very economic with the truth. There's no such a thing as a majority of people in the country are against President Zuma. If that was the case, the streets would be unwalkable. All the various marches that they've done were just a group of about 100 or so people. President Zuma continues to enjoy a groundswell support in South Africa. This is why even yesterday, the young people filled the stadiums at a very short notice to show the support towards the president. All these other groups with a big media backing, they have done nothing.
Hold on, but
in
again,
terms of
I
drawing
say your
the kinds
allies,
of crowds to show
the
confidence.
SACP, the DA, the EFF, the IFP, and so on and so forth. You have the former ministers like Pravin Gordhan and others telling people to take this to the street. You're telling me this is just 100 or so people. This is massive, isn't it? Shouldn't the ANC be looking inward and saying, okay, how are we going to solve this right now, instead of dismissing them as nothing?
No, look, I think what is important is that, again, my fellow panelist here has not even heard the minister speaking on this matter. The issue is the African National Congress policies, the government policies are not changing. When the minister talks about the radical economic transformation, which indeed all of us are unapologetic about, he even said himself that all of that will happen within the fiscal constraints, within the ceilings that are there in place. So there's a lot you can do, even with this space, that was not happening. So there's no change that is going to happen. What is going to happen is that the implementation of the already approved policies is going to happen at a faster pace, but the actual policy direction has not changed. The ANC policies do not change because of individuals. Individuals
but it seems to be
approved
it
ANC
seems to be going
policy.
all in behind one particular individual. Jamie Mighty, we don't have much time, so I'm going to give you a final response to Mr. Manyi. Go ahead, Jamie.
So I think it's very clear that there are a plurality of South Africans who are standing against the decision that was made by Jacob Zuma in the middle of the night. I think on social media, at the memorial service, we saw that. But further, when you do a coherent analysis of the rationale given by Jacob Zuma, which today was explained to be a breakdown of his relationship between himself and Pravin, it doesn't actually explain why the grave decision to substitute Pravin and his deputy together at the same time was made. When a close analysis is made of this accelerated policy change, I think it does bode to the decision that was made by SNP, because it is unclear what the accelerated policy change is actually going to be, because Malusi Kigaba himself said that that has not been formulated clearly. So markets need to know with certain certainty what exactly is being proposed and what is going to be done. In respect to Jacob Zuma, this is not the only bad decision he's made. He has made several bad decisions. This is just the icing on the cake, so to speak. And South Africans have had enough.
Okay, I hate to interrupt you, but I've got to wrap. Jamie Mighty and Zwanele Jemimani, it's been a pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you very much. And that's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.